the human relic hunter. The void stretched endlessly, a black sea of nothingness that seemed to mock Durin's every effort. He slammed a clawed hand onto the console, glaring at the unresponsive scanner display. "Come on, Seraph. Don't make me beg. Run the scan again. This time try harder." The AI's voice crackled through the cabin, dry as a sandstorm. "Running the same scan for the 11th time will not yield a different result, Durin. Insanity is repeating." "I will disconnect you," Durin snapped, pointing a finger at the overhead speakers. "I'll replace you with something cheap and cheerful, like a singing navigation app." Seraph paused. "Scan initiated. Again." Leaning back in his captain's chair, Durin tossed a fragment of ration stick into his mouth and scowled at the empty display. He was no stranger to the void, it was his livelihood after all. But this part of the Orion cluster was different. It felt heavier, more desolate. Even the usual background radiation seemed subdued, as if the universe itself had forgotten this corner of existence. Still, if the relic was here, it would all be worth it. "You know," Durin said, shifting in his seat, "humans were supposed to be these big, galaxy-changing badasses, conquerors, philosophers, explorers. So how come their tech is always buried in the worst parts of space?" Seraph's reply was immediate. "Possibly because they annihilated themselves," he grinned. "Dark, but fair." The truth was, humans fascinated him. They were the ghosts of the galaxy, a species that had vanished long before his ancestors had even discovered fire. All that remained of them were myths, relics, and the occasional data cube full of encrypted gibberish. To some, they were nothing more than bedtime stories. To Durin, they were his ticket to fame and fortune. And if this lead panned out, it would make every miserable moment worth it. Months earlier, on the Halestian homeworld, he'd bought an ancient data cube from a trader too oblivious to know what he had. Durin had taken one look at the faint Terran glyphs etched into its surface and handed over the credits without haggling, a rare moment of generosity, though he'd never admit it. Deciphering the cube had been a nightmare, but what it revealed was worth every sleepless night. A fragment of a star map pointing here to the Orion cluster, and to what the data claimed was a human vessel, an intact human vessel. "Anything yet?" he asked, jabbing at the scanner display for the 4th time in as many minutes. For a moment, silence. Then finally the display flickered. A faint, solitary blip appeared, barely visible against the static. Durin froze, his antennae twitching. "Seraph?" The AI hesitated, almost as if it was reluctant to answer. "Running enhanced analysis. Confirmed. Structure detected approximately 1.2 parsecs ahead. Composition consistent with Terran alloys. No active propulsion or communication signals detected." His heart skipped a beat. He leaped to his feet, claws clattering against the console. "Ha! I knew it! Who doubted me? That's right, nobody." He jabbed a finger at the empty cabin, grinning like a fool. "Your ego is distressing," Seraph deadpanned. Ignoring the AI's jab, Durin leaned closer to the viewport, his grin morphing into a thoughtful smirk. "All right," he muttered, opening a compartment beneath the console. "Let's suit up. You find an ancient death trap, you don't walk in wearing your best casuals." He hauled out his relic hunting suit, a patched and battered piece of gear that had seen more duct tape than maintenance. The helmet's visor was scratched, the seals were grungy, and one knee joint made a faint clicking noise whenever he moved. As he began strapping it on, Seraph's voice chimed in. "That suit has a 24% chance of failing under moderate duress." "And you have a 100% chance of being irritating," Durin shot back, tugging the final strap tight. "We all take risks, don't we?" Slowly, the shape of the derelict came into view, a massive, angular silhouette hanging like a corpse against the faint light of distant stars. "Humans," Durin muttered, shaking his head. "They always built their stuff to look like it was already halfway to falling apart." The Wanderer inched closer, and the derelict's details became clearer. Its hull was pitted and scarred, the kind of damage that told stories of long-forgotten battles. The name of the ship, scrawled in faded Terran script, was barely legible. "Can you make out the name?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Seraph replied after a moment. Eternal resolve. Durin let out a low whistle. Dramatic. Humans always had a thing for drama, didn't they? Possibly because they were often at war with themselves, Seraph offered. Yeah, well, I'm not here to psychoanalyze a dead species, he said, settling back into the captain's chair. I'm here to get rich. Now let's get closer. If I'm lucky, they left something shiny. As the Wanderer drew nearer, the scanner flickered again, momentarily disrupted. Durin frowned. Seraph? What was that? Unknown interference, the AI replied. Residual energy signatures detected. Residual. Right. That was comforting. Durin exhaled, shaking off the creeping unease. Relax, Seraph. What's the worst that could happen? The derelict loomed larger, its shadow swallowing the stars. For the first time, Durin felt a flicker of doubt, but he pushed it aside. After all, no one got famous without taking a few risks. And this was the biggest gamble of his life. The eternal resolve loomed larger with every passing moment, its jagged outline cutting through the darkness like a warning. Durin leaned forward in his chair, eyes locked on the derelict as he adjusted the Wanderer's trajectory. The ancient vessel was massive, far larger than he'd anticipated, and every scar etched into its hull whispered of a history long forgotten. Well, Seraph, he said, his tone light despite the flutter in his stomach, I'd say we've officially found the galaxy's worst fixer-upper. I mean, look at this thing. It's got more dents than a Crothy pub brawl. The AI's voice responded, dry and measured. Apt comparison. Both tend to end with someone drifting lifelessly in space. Durin grinned, letting the barb roll off him. That's the spirit. Keep up the encouragement, and I might just cut your sarcasm subroutine in half. Do that, and I'll replace my subroutine with an audio loop of your snoring, Seraph shot back. He snorted, adjusting the ship's scanners for a closer look at the derelict. The hull was pitted and burned, the result of what must have been an ancient battle. Some of the damage was so extensive it exposed skeletal frameworks beneath, lending the eternal resolve the eerie appearance of a gutted predator. Faded Terran glyphs ran along the ship's midsection, barely visible beneath centuries of accumulated cosmic grime. A peculiar series of etchings stood out among the scars, patterns that looked almost deliberate, like symbols or warnings. Hey, Seraph, those marks look weird. You picking anything up on them? The AI scanned for a moment before replying. Unknown origin. They are consistent with Terran design but may also indicate post-damage tampering, or graffiti. Right, Durin muttered, tilting his head, because nothing screams millennia-old human death trap like vandalism. Bet some pirate carved kill rack was here before getting atomized. Statistically plausible, Seraph replied, though the energy readings I'm detecting are decidedly less humorous. That gave him pause. Energy readings? You told me this thing was dead. It was. However, as we've approached, I'm detecting faint electromagnetic pulses originating from within the ship. Durin frowned. Residual systems kicking in? Possible. Or, Seraph added with a pointed pause, not. The lights in the cabin flickered, drawing Durin's attention. His grin faltered, replaced by a cautious squint. Okay, you're officially ruining the adventure vibe. Stop that. Noted, Seraph replied. Shall I also refrain from pointing out the 34% increase in scanner interference and system instability? Durin rubbed his temple with one claw, muttering under his breath. Just had to buy the AI with a personality. Could have gone for the cheap silent model, but no. Despite the banter, unease began to creep into his chest. Something about the eternal resolve didn't sit right. It was too still, too silent. Ships didn't just drift for thousands of years without someone salvaging them or breaking them apart for scrap. All right, let's dock this thing, he said, shaking off the tension and focusing on the controls. The derelict's docking port came into view, a jagged, partially damaged circle on the ship's side. He frowned. That's not exactly welcoming. Neither is the increasing power surge from within the vessel, Seraph said. Relax, Durin replied with a forced chuckle. It's probably just a loose capacitor or some ancient human toaster trying to reboot. Nothing to worry about. He guided the Wanderer closer, gripping the controls tighter as the docking clamps extended toward the derelict. The first attempt failed, the clamps grinding against warped metal. Durin cursed under his breath, pulling the ship back and adjusting his alignment. Human ships, he muttered, built like tanks but dock like toddlers. Why can't anything just work? Perhaps because this vessel has been adrift for several millennia, Seraph quipped. Thanks for the reminder, Durin shot back. You're a real ray of sunshine, you know that? The second attempt succeeded, the clamps latching onto the derelict with a metallic clang. For a moment, all seemed still. Then a low, reverberating hum vibrated through the cabin. Durin froze. Seraph? Did the ship just sigh at me? Unclear, the AI replied. However, I am now detecting faint rhythmic energy pulses deeper within the vessel. Durin exhaled, trying to laugh off the tension. It's fine. Haunted ships don't exist. That's just holodrama nonsense. The cabin lights flickered again, this time longer than before. A faint vibration rippled through the Wanderer, setting Durin's teeth on edge. Totally fine, he muttered, grabbing his gear and strapping on his utility belt. Nothing weird at all, just a big, creepy old ship that's definitely not plotting to kill me. Self-reassurance, ineffective, Seraph noted. Durin rolled his eyes, standing at the airlock as he stared at the sealed hatch of the Eternal Resolve. His claw hovered over the manual override, hesitating. Here goes nothing, he muttered. As he reached for the lever, a faint sound echoed through the derelict, a metallic scraping. Something was moving. Durin froze, his heart's hammering in his chest. Oh, come on. Creepy noises too? You've got to be kidding me. Recommendation: proceed with extreme caution, Seraph said. Yeah, no kidding, Durin replied, forcing himself to smirk despite the cold sweat running down his back. He gripped the lever tighter and muttered, "What's the worst that could happen?" With a sharp tug, he pulled the override. The hatch hissed open, revealing only darkness beyond. The hatch hissed open, revealing a yawning void of blackness. Durin stood at the edge, his suit light cutting a narrow beam into the corridor beyond. Dust motes danced lazily in the beam's glow, settling like ghostly remnants of centuries gone by. He took a step forward, the sound of his boots muffled against the ancient deck plates. "Seraph, give me a status report," he muttered, his voice crackling slightly in the comms. The AI's response was as dry as ever. The suit is detecting a faint but breathable atmosphere. Oxygen levels are minimal but sufficient for human standards. Durin paused mid-step and tilted his helmet toward the ceiling. Minimal, huh? Well, look at that. Fancy a nice lungful of ancient death, Seraph? Maybe I'll save on oxygen and take off the helmet. I recommend against it, Seraph replied curtly. The atmosphere could contain contaminants, pathogens, or worse. Statistically, exposure would result in respiratory failure within— Yeah, Durin interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. You're such a buzzkill, you know that? He took another step forward, his suit light swinging across the corridor. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, heavy and oppressive. Every surface was coated in a thick layer of grime and corrosion. Dust-covered panels lined the walls, their ancient screens cracked or shattered. As he moved further in, he felt it, a faint vibration beneath his boots, subtle but persistent, like the slow heartbeat of something vast and ancient. "Seraph," he muttered, his antennae twitching. "You feel that?" "I lack physical sensation, Durin," Seraph replied flatly. "However, I am detecting minor vibrations consistent with residual energy flows. It's likely the ship's systems are not fully dormant." Durin smirked. "Not fully dormant, huh? So you're saying it's alive? Great. Should I introduce myself now or wait for it to eat me?" "If this vessel is capable of consumption, you'll likely have no choice," Seraph said. Durin chuckled, despite the faint unease creeping into his chest. He swept his light across the walls, revealing deep scorch marks and jagged scratches that looked disturbingly deliberate. "Okay, that's new," he muttered, crouching to inspect one of the marks. "Claw-like, big claws too. Remind me again how humans wiped themselves out when they had monsters like this hanging around?" Historical records suggest humans were more proficient at self-destruction than they were at dealing with external threats, Seraph offered. Comforting. He stood and continued forward, his light catching glimpses of broken human tech scattered along the floor. A rusted, boxy device sat to the side, its wires spilling out like the entrails of a mechanical corpse. Drin crouched down and tapped it with a claw. No power, he muttered. Figures. Humans built their stuff to last, but I guess nothing survives thousands of years in a place like this. Except you, apparently, Seraph quipped. Drin smirked. I'm a tough one. The corridor stretched ahead, eerily quiet save for the occasional creak of metal underfoot. He paused at an intersection, shining his light in both directions. To the left, a collapsed bulkhead blocked the way. To the right, a faint glow caught his attention. Well, that's inviting, he muttered, turning toward the glow. As he approached, the light grew brighter, emanating from a wall panel partially hidden beneath layers of dust and grime. It was faintly glowing, its surface etched with faded human glyphs. Drin stepped closer, brushing away the dust with a claw. Seraph, tell me this thing isn't about to explode, he said, his tone half serious. I detect no immediate threat. However, interacting with unknown systems is highly inadvisable. It could trigger defensive mechanisms or compromise structural integrity. Yeah, Drin muttered, his curiosity already overriding the AI's warnings. What's life without a little danger, right? He tapped a button at random, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then a low mechanical groan reverberated through the corridor, sending a shiver down his spine. The panel flickered to life, its glyphs shifting and rearranging themselves into a barely comprehensible pattern. Drin leaned closer, squinting at the screen. Well, that's not ominous at all, he muttered. The faint glow extended down the corridor, emergency lights flickering on and bathing the area in a dim red hue. The vibrations beneath his feet grew slightly stronger, and the hum of residual energy deepened, almost like a whisper in the back of his mind. Seraph, I think I just woke something up, he said, half joking, half serious. Indeed, congratulations on your continued pattern of ill-advised decisions, the AI replied. Drin straightened, glancing over his shoulder at the corridor behind him. It was empty, but the oppressive silence felt heavier now, as if the ship itself was watching him. Right, he muttered, gripping his flashlight tighter. Let's keep moving. What's the worst that could happen? The vibrations pulsed again, stronger this time, and for a brief moment he thought he heard something, a faint metallic scraping, distant but deliberate. Drin froze, his heart's hammering in his chest. Seraph, tell me you heard that. I have no auditory capacity, the AI replied, but sensors indicate a faint movement in the vicinity, likely residual mechanisms. Residual my ass, Drin muttered, turning back toward the darkened corridor. The scraping sound came again, louder this time, echoing through the ship like a warning. Well, Drin muttered, forcing a grin, this just keeps getting better. The dim emergency lights cast the corridor in a blood-red hue as Drin crept forward. Each step echoed faintly, swallowed almost instantly by the oppressive silence. The vibrations beneath his boots hadn't stopped, in fact. They seemed to pulse with a rhythm now, slow and deliberate, as if the ship was breathing. Seraph, tell me again this thing isn't alive, he muttered, gripping his flashlight tighter. I have no evidence to suggest biological activity, the AI replied. However, the residual energy patterns are intensifying. Proceed with caution. Drin smirked, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. Caution? Where's the fun in that? As he rounded the corner, the corridor opened into a larger space. His suit light swept across the room, revealing a circular chamber with shattered screens lining the walls. The glass from several displays crunched beneath his boots as he stepped in, the sound unnervingly loud in the quiet. Okay, he said, scanning the room. This looks important. It appears to be the ship's control center, Seraph offered. Drin approached the central console, a massive slab of ancient Terran engineering. Its surface was cracked in places, and wires dangled haphazardly from underneath. He brushed a claw over the dusty controls, revealing faint, faded glyphs beneath the grime. Humans sure love their buttons, he muttered. Durin, Seraph said sharply, I must reiterate, interacting with unknown systems could trigger unintended consequences. This ship may contain… Treasure, Durin interrupted, his grin returning. Come on, Seraph. If they didn't want people pressing buttons, they shouldn't have made them so shiny. Before Seraph could protest further, Durin tapped a button at random. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan that seemed to come from the depths of the ship, the console flickered to life. Lights danced across its cracked surface, and several of the shattered screens on the walls sparked and buzzed. Well, would you look at that? Durin said, leaning closer to the console. The displays sputtered and finally stabilized, showing corrupted lines of human text interspersed with schematics and flickering maps. One of the screens in particular caught his eye, a map of the ship, with a pulsating red dot deep within its lower levels. Seraph, what am I looking at here? The AI scanned the data. The map appears to highlight the ship's layout. The red marker likely indicates either a critical system or an anomaly. Treasure, Durin declared, pointing at the screen. That's gotta be treasure. I must remind you, Durin, that anomalies rarely signify something desirable. It could be a reactor meltdown, a security system, or something shiny, Durin finished, grinning. I'm going with shiny. Before Seraph could respond, a new sound interrupted the moment, a loud metallic groan from deep within the ship. It reverberated through the chamber, followed by a faint rhythmic thudding. Durin froze, his antennae twitching. What's that? I am detecting movement several decks below, Seraph said, his tone unusually tense. This ship is not dormant. The thudding grew louder, accompanied by faint clicks and scrapes. Durin glanced back at the map, noting the red dot's position. It hadn't moved. Whatever was making the noise, it wasn't coming from the marked location. Looks like we've got company, Durin muttered, his smirk faltering. Or treasure. Let's hope for treasure. He turned toward the corridor he'd just entered from, gripping his flashlight tighter. The rhythmic sound was unmistakable now. Clink, clink, clink. Seraph's voice cut through the growing tension. Durin, movement detected. Behind you. He spun around, the beam of his light sweeping the doorway. Nothing. The corridor was empty, but the sound persisted, louder now, deliberate and methodical. Okay, Durin muttered, backing toward the console. Definitely haunted. Fantastic. The light flickered briefly, plunging the room into near darkness. When it returned, his flashlight caught a fleeting glimpse of something scuttling out of sight. A shadow, low to the ground and unnaturally fast. Seraph, tell me you saw that, he hissed. I do not have visual capacity, the AI replied calmly. However, I have detected rapid movement consistent with a small mechanical object. Durin swallowed hard, his pulse racing. Small and mechanical? That doesn't sound so bad. A faint metallic scraping echoed through the control room, closer this time. The emergency lights dimmed slightly, and the rhythmic thudding sound grew louder, now accompanied by faint mechanical clicks. Well, this just keeps getting better, Durin muttered, forcing a grin as he slowly reached for the plasma cutter strapped to his belt. If something lunged at him, at least he'd go down carving it to bits. The scraping stopped. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, from the darkness, a voice crackled through the air, garbled and faint. Unauthorized. Access. Detected. Durin froze. The words echoed through the room, garbled and mechanical, yet laced with a deliberate menace. His flashlight beam swept across the control room, catching faint glints of shattered glass and twisted metal, but no movement. Unauthorized. Access. Detected, the voice repeated, crackling through unseen speakers. Seraph, Durin whispered, his antennae twitching furiously. Tell me that's just a pre-recorded message. I'm afraid not, the AI replied, its tone clipped. Sensors indicate localized movement in this sector. The ship's systems are partially active, and something is responding to your presence. Durin's clawed hand tightened on the plasma cutter at his belt. Something? Fantastic. Got anything more specific than something? Unfortunately, the energy readings are inconsistent, Seraph said, almost apologetic. It could be a remnant maintenance system, or a defensive mechanism. Or treasure, Durin said weakly, trying to grin but failing miserably. The rhythmic clink, clink, clink grew louder, each metallic impact punctuated by a faint scraping, like a rusted limb dragging across the floor. Durin backed toward the console, his light swinging wildly across the room. The sound wasn't coming from the corridor, it was in the control room now, circling just beyond the edge of the dim emergency lights. "Seraph," he hissed, his voice low and tight. "I need options. What am I dealing with?" "Processing," the AI replied. "Stay calm." "Calm? I'm calm. This is me calm," Durin snapped, gripping his plasma cutter tighter. A shadow darted into the edge of his flashlight's beam, a small, scuttling figure. It moved awkwardly, one leg dragging behind it with a grinding noise. The rhythmic clinking matched its uneven steps. "There!" Durin shouted, his flashlight pinning the figure in its beam. What he saw made him blink in disbelief. It was a drone, a squat, rusted maintenance bot, barely the size of a crate. Its cylindrical body was covered in dents, and one of its wheels was bent at an absurd angle, causing it to clunk with every rotation. A mismatched mechanical limb dragged behind it, scraping the floor as it moved. "Unauthorized. Access. Detected," it repeated, its garbled voice coming from a speaker that seemed on the verge of disintegration. Durin stared, his tension evaporating in a wave of incredulous laughter. "You've got to be kidding me. That's the big, scary thing making all that noise?" "I recommend caution," Seraph warned. "Despite its decrepit appearance, it may still be functional and dangerous." "Dangerous?" Durin said, gesturing at the stumbling bot. "It's got a wheel for a leg and it's dragging itself like it forgot how to die properly." The drone paused, its flickering optics focusing on Durin. For a moment it was unnervingly still. Then it spoke again, louder this time. "Unauthorized access. Initiating protocol." A hatch opened on its side, and a spindly mechanical arm extended, holding what looked like a crude welder. Sparks flew as the arm began to sputter to life. Durin's grin vanished. "Okay, maybe not entirely harmless. I suggest evasive action," Seraph said flatly. Durin dove behind the console as sparks flew past his helmet, landing with a grunt. The welder arm of the maintenance bot sputtered like it had a grudge against everything alive, or in Durin's case, unauthorized. "Hey!" Durin shouted, peeking out from cover. "You rust bucket! I'm not here to steal your bolts!" The drone froze mid-lurch, its optics flickering erratically. The welder arm retracted with a jittery motion, but the whirring noise it emitted sounded almost panicked. A garbled, shaky voice followed, a mix of static and distorted syllables. "Sit bolts! Neg! Mine! No steal! Ing!" Durin blinked, his antennae twitching. "What the hell was that? Did it just talk?" "It did," Seraph replied with the vocal equivalent of an eye roll. "Though its galactic standard is, frankly, atrocious. Allow me to translate. Stealing bolts? Negative. My bolts are mine, no stealing." Durin straightened slightly, his plasma cutter still gripped tightly in one hand. "It thinks I'm here to steal its bolts?" He laughed incredulously. "What kind of maintenance bot is this?" "The malfunctioning kind," Seraph replied dryly. "Please avoid further antagonizing it." The bot's optics flickered again as it shifted its attention toward Durin. Its welder arm jittered but didn't extend. A new stream of garbled speech followed. "Unauthorized personnel. Danger like other Earths." "Translation?" Durin prompted, raising a brow. Seraph sighed. "It says unauthorized personnel. Dangerous, like the others." Durin lowered his plasma cutter slightly, curiosity overriding his caution. "The others? Wait, there were others? What happened to them?" The drone hesitated, its bent wheel grinding loudly as it shifted its weight. Then it replied, its voice even shakier. "Repelled. Other successful. Mostly. Some fell into reactor pit. Not my fault." Durin's jaw dropped slightly. "Not your fault. Did you just admit to tossing intruders into a pit?" "It seems logical," Seraph interjected. "Crude but efficient. The pit appears to have been the preferred method of conflict resolution. The bot emitted a high-pitched whir that might have been agreement. Protect, ship, protect protocol, sys. Intruder, sys. Danger. Must. Repel. Durin stared for a long moment, then let out a sharp laugh. You're telling me this thing's been chucking people into a pit for centuries? What kind of ship was this, a death trap disguised as a junkyard? Clearly, Seraph replied, but it seems you've managed to avoid joining the pit's illustrious list of victims. So far. Comforting, Durin muttered. Real comforting. Durin slowly lowered his plasma cutter completely, taking a step toward the drone. It was in worse shape than he'd initially thought. One wheel wobbled so badly it was barely functional, and several appendages dangled like broken twigs. Okay, he said cautiously. Do you have a name, or do I just call you Rusty? The drone whirred loudly, its optics flickering in what seemed like indignation. A burst of garbled noise followed. Main 10, Ants, Unit 13, tasked, maintain, ship integrity. Seraph, ever helpful, added, It says its designation is Maintenance Unit 13, tasked with maintaining ship integrity. Durin groaned. That's a mouthful. How about bolt? Because you're clinging to this place like a loose bolt about to fall off. The drone paused, its optics dimming briefly before replying with a begrudging whir. Bolt, designation, accepted, begrudgingly. See? Progress. Durin grinned and looked up at the ceiling. Even you have to admit that's better. Debatable, Seraph replied, though I'm sure its agreement stems more from desperation than preference. Durin leaned casually against the console, still catching his breath from their earlier introduction. He grinned at the newly named Bolt. So, Bolt, what exactly have you been up to on this ancient death trap? Because let me tell you, your welcome committee needs work. Bolt's optics flickered nervously, and it emitted a jittery whir before replying in its garbled voice. Ship, power levels, critical, protocol active, imminent self-destruction. The grin melted off Durin's face in an instant. Wait, what? He spun toward the ceiling, glaring at nothing. Seraph, translation, now. Seraph's voice filtered through the comms with its usual dry tone, but there was an unmistakable edge to it this time. Ship power critical, new protocol active. Without human restoration, the ship will self-destruct when reserves reach 0.01%. Durin froze, his antennae twitching wildly. It's gonna blow itself up? You couldn't have mentioned that before I walked in? Bolt whirred again, this time with a sound suspiciously like exasperation. Protocol. Standard. Unauthorized. Scavenging. Must prevent loss. Of Terran assets. Oh, that's great. Perfect. The ship's paranoid. Of course it is. Durin gestured wildly at Bolt. You've built yourself a real palace of sanity, Bolt. Turning back to Seraph, he asked, And what's it at now? 90%? 80%? We've got time, right? Seraph didn't miss a beat. 0.7%, time remaining, negligible. Durin threw up his hands. Oh, fantastic. Why not just blow up now and save us the suspense? Logic, flawed, Bolt interjected, its tone almost affronted. Cannot, abandon protocol, must protect Terran tech. Durin groaned, rubbing his temples with his claws. You're loyal to a bunch of dead humans who aren't even here to appreciate it. Fantastic. He sighed, forcing himself to calm down. Okay, Bolt, listen to me. How about this? I get you out of here. You ditch this floating death trap, come with me, and here's the kicker. I help you find the humans. Bolt froze, its optics dimming momentarily before flickering back to life. Humans, real? Locate? Possible? Possible, Durin replied, shrugging. Not a guarantee, mind you. I don't know where they are, but I'm looking for them too. Call it a mutual project. You help me grab something valuable, a treasure, a relic, something that might lead us to them, and you can join my crew. Deal? Bolt whirred, clearly processing. Join, crew. Temporary authorization? New captain? Yeah, we can call it temporary, Durin said quickly, waving a hand. We'll make it official if we ever find them. What do you say? Bolt tilted slightly, a faint grinding noise accompanying the movement. Terran data, vital, Data core, encrypted, contains knowledge, potential, coordinates. Durin blinked. The data core? You're saying it might have coordinates where we can find the humans? Possibility high, maybe even Earth, Bolt replied. But protocol limits access. Ship self-destructs without retrieval. Well, that's convenient, Durin muttered, but his expression brightened as he rubbed his hands together. All right, Bolt. You help me grab that data core and we'll make a run for it. Then you're officially part of my crew. Temporary crew, Bolt corrected. Until humans located. Seraph sighed audibly. Wonderful. Now we have 2 stubborn, outdated relics to deal with. Durin grinned. Don't act like you're not thrilled about it. He turned back to Bolt. Now let's grab that core and get the hell out of here before you and your precious protocols turn us all into space debris. The ship shuddered violently as the trio bolted from the control room, the data core clutched tightly in Durin's hands. Bulkheads groaned, and a loud metallic screech echoed through the corridors. Seraph! Durin shouted. Give me the fastest way out of here! I already have, Seraph replied. If you'd stop grandstanding, you might actually make it. Helpful as ever, Durin muttered, skidding around a corner. Behind him, Bolt clattered loudly, pausing occasionally to scan a malfunctioning system or realign a wobbling limb. Bolt, hurry it up! The ship's gonna blow! Integrity. Critical. Must repair. Must escape! Durin shouted, yanking the drone forward. You can fix the next death trap, I promise! The lights flickered again, and a massive section of the corridor collapsed behind them with a deafening crash. Captain, I suggest less sarcasm and more speed, Seraph quipped. Durin gritted his teeth as the exit hatch came into view. Almost there, Bolt. You're not ditching me for a reactor pit today. The drone whirred loudly, its optics fixed on the hatch. New captain. Priority. Escape imminent. They dove through the airlock just as the ship trembled violently, its structure on the verge of total collapse. Durin barely stumbled into the cockpit, clutching the glowing data core as the derelict ship behind them began its final collapse. Alarms blared throughout the Wanderer, the entire vessel trembling from the shockwaves of the detonation. Get us out of here, Seraph! Durin barked, slamming into the captain's chair. Seraph's voice crackled through the comms as dry as ever. I was waiting for your dramatic order. Engaging engines now. The Wanderer lurched forward, engines roaring to life as it rocketed away from the imploding derelict. Through the viewport, shards of metal and debris scattered into the void, glowing faintly against the backdrop of distant stars. The remains of the Terran ship folded in on itself before vanishing in a burst of silent, shimmering light. Durin exhaled loudly, slumping into his seat as the Wanderer stabilized. He held up the glowing data core, its faint blue light casting eerie patterns on his face. Well, Bolt, that's what I call earning your keep, he said with a crooked grin. Now let's hope this thing has something worth all the near-death experiences. Bolt clunked into the cargo bay, his wobbling wheel grinding noisily and one arm dangling precariously. Ship destroyed. Mission failed. But new captain safe. Success? Seraph's voice crackled through the comms, dry as ever. Success is an interesting word choice, considering the situation. Durin shot a mock glare at the overhead speaker. We're alive, aren't we? That counts as success in my book. He turned to Bolt, pointing a clawed finger. And you don't have to keep calling me new captain every 5 minutes. We get it. You're on the team now. Bolt tilted his cylindrical body, his optics flickering. Acknowledged. Temporary crew status. Accepted. Durin groaned, leaning back in his chair. That includes not saying that every time we talk. Just say okay or something. Bolt emitted a low whir, processing the request. Understood. Durin chuckled, shaking his head. See? Progress. Durin turned the glowing data core over in his claws, marveling at the craftsmanship. This little thing better have some answers, he muttered. Coordinates, maps, even a shopping list. Whatever the humans left behind, I want it. Seraph's voice crackled again. Assuming it's not encrypted beyond your understanding, Captain, you do realize your approach to deciphering technology often involves random button pressing. Durin smirked. Hey, it worked back there, didn't it? He stood and turned toward Bolt, studying the wobbling drone. Speaking of things barely working, let's get you fixed up, buddy. You're not going to make it through another adventure with that arm hanging off like a broken antenna. Bolt tilted again, emitting a quiet chirp. Repairs. Acceptable. Durin stood and headed for the cargo bay, grabbing his toolkit. Good. Let's get to work then. No slacking, Bolt. You got a lot to prove. As he knelt down to inspect the drone's damaged arm, the faint glow of the data core caught his eye again. His smirk widened. Humans better be as impressive as everyone says they were, or I'm charging them interest for all this effort. Seraph's voice came through once more. I'll keep track of your bill, Captain, though I suspect it will only grow larger. Durin snorted, tossing a wrench into his free hand. Add it to the tab, Seraph. We've got a galaxy to search. And as he set to work repairing Bolt, the Wanderer drifted further into the stars, the promise of discovery glowing faintly in the cargo hold.